No aspect of Jiu-jitsu is invented, only discovered. Every possible submission, sweep, or throw already exists. Therefore, progression is a matter of revelation. We have to learn to see what is there, and in our case, here to explore. Welcome to the Placeholder Podcast, Season 1, Episode 2, where we cover the fastest growing sport and the most complex martial art, Brazilian Jiu-jitsu.
The Placeholder Podcast with Dan and Shane. And today's a pretty interesting episode because Shane is going to be talking about Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. I don't know much about Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. I have not trained it ever, other than rolling a few times with Shane. But I do know about other martial arts, so I'm going to be the dummy. So Shane, what is Brazilian Jiu-jitsu?
Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, or Jiu-jitsu rather, that is the...
Don't correct my pronunciation.
Oh my goodness.
I said it the correct way. You have to accept it that way.
Very true. Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, it is a combination of judo, wrestling, and catch wrestling. It is called the gentle art, and it comprises of guards, sweeps, passes, and finishing holds that they call submissions.
So it's a fighting form called the gentle art where you have to rest. What's the history of Brazilian Jiu-jitsu? Why is it Brazilian and then Japanese words? Why is that confusing me?
It derived from Japanese Jiu-jitsu, which was the traditional martial art that was used to disarm samurai warriors in their armor. As the way of the samurai kind of faded out, people weren't in favor of that kind of brutality, so they converted Japanese Jiu-jitsu into a sport called judo, or what we now know as judo. While judo was very popular, some people felt that it was missing the actual aspect of self-defense and fighting. So two people, they went to Brazil and they were teaching, and they ran to the Gracie family. And in particular, one of the Gracies was weaker and frail bodied. And so these techniques were adapted and mainly fought on the ground where they could utilize more leverage, and that gave birth to Brazilian Jiu-jitsu.
So Brazilian Jiu-jitsu was the first to do it on the ground?
No, ground techniques did exist in judo and Japanese Jiu-jitsu. It's just that because of the weak-bodied and frailness of, I believe it was Elio Gracie, that the techniques that were involved in judo were adapted so that it could be more suitable for a weaker opponent.
Oh, interesting. I heard a different explanation for the difference between BJJ and judo.
Oh, go ahead.
My understanding is judo started out having all the same ground game and emphasis as jiu-jitsu. But when it went to the Olympics, they changed it so that you only fight on the ground for 30 seconds or something in order to kind of keep the matches more interesting and focus on the takedown game of it. And so judo got morphed into sports judo rather than pure, traditional judo.
Yeah, I think
whereas BJJ, it never had it didn't consider itself a sports judo. It's more of an adaptation of traditional jiu-jitsu, which has all the ground game emphasis.
Mm-hmm. They had a little bit of both there, so I think that judo did become more of a sport. Brazilian Jiu-jitsu is still a sport, but the thing with judo is that through sportification, they did not allow you to grab the legs because they had these annual judo versus American wrestling or freestyle wrestling matchups. They evolved, but lineage-wise, though, it went Japanese Jiu-jitsu, judo, Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. In actuality, they're really the same thing. Whether you're stretching someone's arm or choking them or slamming someone head first or hip first into the ground, either way is going to end a fight.
Right. So, how did you get involved in Brazilian Jiu-jitsu? Tell me your personal story of how did you discover it? Why do you like it so much? What does it mean to you?
I was always interested in martial arts. I did very briefly. I think it was like only for like a couple months I did Taekwondo as a child, but it wasn't until I kind of reached adulthood where I was interested in boxing. I competed after a series of smokers and a few knockouts and some competition fights. I realized that boxing wasn't the sport for me, and I jumped into I think Krav Maga. What was the next thing? But I quickly realized that was a little bit bullshit and bullshit. So I jumped around, tried the MMA thing, and I realized I was like really shitty at MMA, and I really wanted extra work with the ground game and the grappling, and tried Jiu-jitsu, and it was love at first fight, I guess.
Would you consider Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like a traditional martial art or a modern martial art? And do you think there's a meaningful difference between the two?
I consider both, actually, if you think about it. If we're looking at what is traditional versus a modern martial art, all it is traditions, if we're talking about it. The bowing to the flag and reciting tenets, those are all things that you'll see in traditional martial arts, such as Taekwondo. They kind of like say something like a pledge of allegiance, saying like, these are the things that we believe in for Taekwondo. This is the purpose of Taekwondo.
Right. There's almost like a spiritual element to it. There's this deeper mental process alongside the physical process.
Yes, and you see the actual traditions of like Korean culture being like shared. You're seeing people bowing to each other. You're seeing traditional language being used. They don't say like 1, 2, 3. They count it out. I don't even know how to count in Korean, but
and a dual set.
Exactly, right? So that is traditional martial arts. They're carrying on traditions through martial arts. It's more of like a shared culture aspect. You do get that with modern martial arts, but not to the same degree.
Right.
Rather than bowing, you're going to get slaps and fist bumps in modern martial arts. And boxing, you get a fist bump, a pounder, right? You touch gloves. Compared to something like Taekwondo, where you're actually bowing and you're calling each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe in Taekwondo, for example, to get your belt promotions, you needed to learn things like certain Korean vocabulary.
Yeah, and you don't.
So it's all these cultural things are, part of the DNA of this martial art. Whereas boxing, you can have these sort of cultural relics in it, but at the end of the day, boxing is the physical aspect of the sport.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a really weird thing, but also it's kind of cool. And I'm not sure if I want traditional martial arts to go away, even though they're proven to be not as effective.
Well, then my next question is, what sort of environment do you like to learn martial arts in? Do you appreciate the traditional relics and cultural relics that a lot of martial arts have, or do you think that just focus on getting good at the sport and ignore the deeper, quote unquote, spiritual side of the martial art?
I like a bit of both. I like the reason why I think I like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's like the blending, I guess, of multiple cultures.
Right.
I think you get to see where things come together. You get to kind of see where people mix and match and choose their ideas, and you get a bit of both, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I like training and learning a little bit of everything, right? I like the fact that things are laid back. I don't have to call anyone master or sensei.
Right.
But I still get to call the person who's instructing me coach or professor, and so you kind of get
professor.
Yeah, it takes 16 years to get your black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, on average. There's people who do it like in 3 years, but majority.
I just find the title professor a bit funny. I hope they call their black belts PhDs as well.
Maybe, but
might as well. It's basically what it is.
It is. I think that's the reason why they call them professor, because the other word is like maestre, right? Is like the master in Portuguese, but they also use professor as teacher, so it's kind of a double entendre, and that's kind of once again the modern versus traditional debate.
So how does BJJ work in terms of its ranking? And like, can you walk us through your experience with the ranking system and what it means to say? Is it like Taekwondo? You go white, yellow, and then how does this all work?
Yeah. So BJJ has 5 main belts. It's the white, blue, purple, brown, and black. And then after that, it gets confusing that even some black belts don't even know how the ranking system works after that. Starting out is at the very beginner level. It's the white belt. That's going to be the first belt that you purchase, but it's still the most important belt in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner's journey. And that just signifies that you're willing to start learning, and you're willing to get your ego checked through multiple submissions and multiple defeats.
Right.
Moving over, the next level is blue, which is it's essentially you are street ready, and you can handle yourself against a larger opponent.
A larger untrained opponent, or
untrained and
right.
Untrained or less trained bigger person.
Right.
At the purple belt, you are what they call street proficient, and that means basically you are a black belt or an expert in one area of your game. From there, brown and black belts, they're a bit confusing to me because I have no absolute way of comprehending this. As a lowly blue belt, I really can't tell the difference between a brown and a black belt. They both mess me up.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like it would be one of those things that I think you used the term invisible jiu-jitsu before.
Mm-hmm.
If you see a lot of people who are higher level in jiu-jitsu, they can see things that most people can't see, and it's all this little invisible things, just a tiny shifting of weight and whatnot, that really sets apart the masters from just the proficient.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's a game of inches, but the higher and higher levels you go, it becomes like a game of like millimeters, and even then like micromillimeters. It's something that you feel, and the only way to do it is to struggle and get your butt kicked by people that are better than you.
So what's the appeal of BJJ, at least for you? Like what sort of person would you recommend BJJ for, and why?
I'd recommend BJJ for everyone. The beauty of the
but that's a shitty answer. Can you tell me specifically what type of people would love BJJ? BS.
Okay.
I mean, everyone with this communist propaganda.
The specific person is actually like IT nerds, and women are probably the ideal crowd. And that's just because of looking at the first UFCs. It's someone that's a smaller opponent is capable of controlling a larger opponent, and for some reason the jiu-jitsu community is filled with nerds. I think
for some reason, do you think you can identify any of these reasons?
I think it's just people who like problem solving. I think that's
right.
The main reason why. It's people who like problem solving. I think it's also nerds that never got like enough attention, and there's like this aspect of you're hugging and getting like a physical reward of touch too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a sport where you're kind of hugging, squeezing, and slapping hands with people and laughing. It's a very safe community for nerds. It's also like the only fighting system where you can fight full tilt and not get hurt.
Right. That's interesting, because my first impression of it is basically it looks like chess, but with your own body as the pieces in the chessboard. Because it does seem very technical. There's all these different strategies and mini games, that you're playing with the other person on the other side of the chessboard. But instead of using a push-up, you're using a joint. You're using your left arm versus his left leg or something like that.
Yeah.
So I see the appeal for people who like competitive strategy games, but also now in a more safe but very physical form. So what do you think is going to happen in the future? Because now we see with UFC and mixed martial arts, we see a lot of these very different traditions of how to understand martial arts sort of melting together in a pot, right? Like you can't just be a BJJ guy in the UFC. You have to have a striking system incorporated into it, and vice versa. You can't just be a kickboxer. You have to be able to, at the very least, prevent the takedown. So you're seeing lots of blending across martial arts. Do you think eventually, all these different martial arts will actually become all the same thing?
I think so. I think there will, in my opinion, I think just like people where everything's mixing, I think eventually there won't be a jiu-jitsu, there won't be a judo, there won't be a wrestling. It'll all just be martial arts.
Right. So globalization is destroying another cultural relic of human civilization.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting thing, right? So would you prefer people to hang on to the traditions and say that culture is not to be shared, or would you like culture to be shared?
I'm always for sharing culture.
Well,
I think that's sort of, in my mind, is a no-brainer, but I'm sure there's people that always disagree in one way or the other.
Do you think modern Brazilians get accused of cultural appropriation for wearing the gi?
I don't. I mean, knowing what I know about the internet, there's probably some losers on there that would say that, but the real world is quite different from the internet, I feel. All this manufactured outrage that gets the clicks. I don't think anyone cares. This is one of these things with a lot of cultural appropriation. If you actually go to the homeland of these cultures, like you go to Japan and ask people, what do you think about people like wearing Japanese clothing or the gi and doing these things? I don't think anyone would look at it negatively.
No, not at all. I think it's kind of cool that, I think most people say that's kind of cool that you're willing to learn more.
They'll be culture. Puffing up with pride, like, oh yeah, the world loves this aspect of my culture. They love our sport.
Yeah, it's a very Americanized thing. There is one thing that I do want to bring up, just because we are running out of time. There was a point where we actually got to see cultures clash and come full circle. So we talked about how all these martial arts evolved and spawned one another. Yep. Kurt Angle actually got into what they call a shoot match with Daniel Pudi. I forget his name.
Okay.
So for our audience who doesn't know, Kurt Angle is an actual gold medalist freestyle wrestler, and he got into a fake wrestling match with Daniel Puder, I think that's his name, who is an actual mixed martial artist. And a shoot match is where it's supposed to be a fake fight, but then it turns real. And these two actually got into a fight, and it's actually on the internet and happened on TV. Yeah.
So would this happen in like WWE or?
It did, yes. So they were doing a reality TV show called Tough Enough, and Kurt Angle was on the mic and said, none of you guys are tough enough, and was cutting his promo. And a part of it was that Kurt Angle was an actual Olympic wrestler, so he challenged all these contestants in front of everyone in the ring to an actual freestyle match, and Kurt Angle was just smushing everyone until he ran into this guy, Daniel Puder.
Interesting. So it was just a legit shoot wrestling match in WWE.
After Kurt Angle smushed everyone, he was cutting his promo and said, well, none of you guys are tough enough. And this MMA fighter actually puts up his hand and goes, you know what? I'm tough enough. And Kurt Angle's like, oh shit, I'm going to have to wrestle this guy. And the whole entire crowd is chanting UFC. So Kurt Angle's on the spot and he has to wrestle this dude. And he shoots him for a takedown, and this guy stuffs it. And it's like, oh shit, they're actually full on grappling. Shoots again, gets stuffed. Kurt Angle finally picks him up on the single leg, but they kind of peel off to the middle of the ropes. And when they do that, this Daniel Pudi guy, this MMA fighter, slaps on the Kimura on Kurt Angle and puts Angle in the guard. But because he's on his back, the ref has to find a way to have
To
Kurt
end
Angle
it?
save face. So
Right.
while he's slapping on the Kimura and dislocating Kurt Angle's shoulder, the ref pins 1, 2, 3 and counts out the MMA fighter. And they both stand up immediately, and Kurt Angle is pissed and embarrassed and gets in his face. And it's like, oh shit, it's actually not a gimmick. This is a real fight.
That's hilarious. I'm watching it now. This is crazy. I mean, I had it with sound up because I was listening to you, but it looks like a very legit wrestling match. And yeah, like you said, like what's this guy's name? Daniel. He gets the Kimura, and it looks pretty gross. It looks like it's in there really good, but he is on his back, so they just tap it out. And it's funny because Daniel like stands up and like puts out his hand to shake Kurt Angle hand. And Kurt Angle just gets right close to his face. You can see the blood vessels in his head start popping out. He's yelling. I don't know if this part of the show, but starts yelling directly in his face. You can tell Daniel is very defensive. He's like, oh shit, this guy is really angry.
Yeah, probably one of the most bizarre moments in WWE history. But what's even funny after that is that they had to try and work this into the story. So this Daniel guy, his gimmick for the rest of the year was that he'd wear a t-shirt called I Hurt Kurt.
That's awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll let you sign it out since you've been moderator this time.
Oh god, I'm not ready for this. Запутал structure.
Мы очень рады, что вы подключились сегодня к нам в наш подкаст, подкаст «Заполнитель». У нас нет следующей темы для вас, но мы думаем, что она будет очень интересна, и мы будем рады, если вы снова включитесь и будете с нами на следующей неделе. Спасибо всем. Пока.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good evening, comrades.
Takedowns,